I don't know if it's really possible to overstate just how crappy movie tie-in games used to be during the 1990s, especially during the whole 16-bit era. And I can say that on the Mega Drive alone, I personally got burned with stuff like Batman Forever, Judge Dredd, and the Terminator 2 game. Along with the arguably even worse one made for DOS, published by Ocean Software, who were also well known at the time, specifically for movie tie-ins. In fact, the best Terminator game we had back then wasn't even a Terminator game, it was RoboCop vs Terminator, which was way more RoboCop's story than anyone else's. I guess my point is that we've definitely been starved for decent 16-bit style Terminator games, which thankfully now in 2025 is looking like it's going to be rectified, with the awesome Terminator No Fate just being released, developed by Bitmap Bureau. The Steam store page describes it as experiencing the thrill of Terminator 2 Judgment Day with arcade action and pixel-perfect graphics. Yep, sounds about right. Full disclosure before we start as well, I did get a free copy of the game from the website Keymailer for this review, but this is not a sponsored video, and I'm going to be going over all the good and bad points here as much as I can, most of which are thankfully good. Because what Bitmap Bureau have done here is kinda similar to what Taeon did with Terminator Resistance, creating a passionate love letter to that source material. Something that's just again brimming with faithfulness and a whole bunch of Easter eggs and other references that fans of the movies are going to lap up. Or with some of the most gorgeous sprite work we've seen in recent memory that perfectly captures the vibe of the era, but then also still feeling modern and updated. I mean, even the continue screen is awesome and right on brand.
That's awesome!
It's kind of hard to describe it, but it's like a game that doesn't feel real. Do you remember how on the internet, before AI was a thing, how you'd often see people making these really detailed pixel art mock-ups for like an old movie or something? Yeah, well, this is what that feels like. It's one of those old concept images that someone's done in their spare time, only it's real and in constant motion. And the opening alone gave me goosebumps with this super cool intro that feels like something right out of an old arcade game. Before it then drops you on the title screen with what's one of the best renditions of that theme tune I think we've ever had.
I can't believe what I'm hearing!
It's even got that whole thing where if you leave the menu idle long enough, it starts to play a random demo. Which is something that old games always used to do, considering back then they'd often be set up in electronics or game stores to entice people to check them out. The only thing that really sticks out to me is at no point do we ever see Arnie in this thing at all. I mean, you can see they've very clearly carried over their likeness for Robert Patrick and Linda Hamilton, and even Edward Furlong is here as well.
That's definitely you.
But at no point do we ever actually see the Austrian oak himself. In fact, during that demo that shows off the character, the skin on his face is completely blown away. I don't actually know what the reasoning is, like maybe it was too expensive to get the rights or something, but either way, like it does detract from this thing feeling as official and faithful as it possibly could have.
Chill out, dickwad.
Either way though, after you made it to the title screen, you're presented with two available modes here, the story mode and then an arcade mode. With the story mode being a mostly accurate recreation of the second movie, just adding in a whole bunch of new things to pad the overall length out. With the arcade mode being the same, but limited to the scenes from the film, and only giving you a single continue. So, yeah, probably not something you're going to want to play through first.
That's great, see, you're getting it.
Now, the story mode starts off with a prologue with Sarah and John out in the middle of the desert as she's teaching him how to use firearms. Before some bloke then turns up and Double Dragon style knocks John out and kidnaps him. What then follows is a bit of a tutorial teaching you the basics of the controls while shooting enemies that don't put up that much of a fight. And as you'd expect from a 2D platformer and run and gun shooter, it's all about just moving from the left of the screen to the right, then sometimes back in the opposite direction and maybe either up and down. You've always got infinite ammo for whatever weapon you're holding, and there's a slide move here as well, handy for dodging projectiles due to its iframes, but also stunning and knocking back enemies. Holding down either the left or right trigger locks you in position 2, so you can shoot in any direction without moving, which, yeah, is pretty handy for certain bosses. And then finally, depending on who you're playing as, you can either throw explosives or, in the case of the T-800, headbutt whoever's in range. So this whole prologue stage of Sarah serves its job pretty well as introducing all of this in a pretty low threat environment. Also reminding me a hell of a lot of the opening levels from the Mega Drive version of RoboCop vs Terminator. In fact, you've even got guys hiding in the buildings and shooting at you from the windows, which is identical to some of the enemies in that game. If you've got a sharp eye here too, you'll also find the assault rifle tucked away along with a spare continue, both of which are important. Firstly, because the rifle has infinite ammo and is just way better than the pistol, and then secondly, because those continues are really hard to come by.
Continue acquired.
Anyway, eventually you come up against the guy who kidnapped John, who calls himself Bandit Bob.
Uncle Bob, huh? Okay.
Which also seems to be a bit of a reference to one of the bosses from Metal Slug, even down to the layout of the arena and the way this bloke jumps around.
Come on, boy!
He's not too tough though, and as soon as it's over, Sarah heads off back to LA to destroy the Cyberdyne building, making me realise I was about to play through all the stuff that got her into the shit and arrested before the events in the movie.
She tried to blow up the computer factory, but she got shot and arrested.
Now you're taking on all the various security forces working for Cyberdyne, along with these guys who look a lot like the enemies from Rolling Thunder 2, even coming out of doors in a similar fashion. And after moving through the old classic factory style level with conveyor belts and mechanical hazards, you're up against the boss, the Cyberdyne mainframe, which in typical 90s fashion takes up the entirety of the screen. All of which ends with Sarah getting arrested and presumably sent off to Pescadero Hospital.
Oh shit.
Before it actually gets to the plot of the movie though, we got a whole new series of levels here set during the future war where you're playing as John Connor himself. All of which is just basically one massive boss rush, taking on all these different machines one after the other. He pretty much controls the same as Sarah, with the only difference being that he throws pipe bombs instead of grenades. And instead of a pistol or an assault rifle, he's got a plasma rifle in a 40-watt range, of course.
Hey, just what you see, pal.
And overall, these levels are pretty fucking cool, feeling very Contra-like in a lot of regards, particularly with some of the weapon power-ups you get and the different bosses. One of the power-ups is a homing projectile, another one is a laser which is able to shoot through walls, classic, and then the final one is basically the spread shot from Contra. This bit here also gave me serious flashbacks to the elevator sequence in Shinobi 3, and then one of the boss fights also seems to be a reference to one in Metal Slug 2, with this hovering gunship thing you need to take out. Another thing I noticed in these levels was just how great the new renditions of the music are. I mean, just listen to this. But it was also where the difficulty ramped up quite a bit, especially with the bosses. And it really is from this point on where you really need to pay attention and learn their attack patterns, or else it's very easy to get killed. Anyway, after this is where John sends the T-800 into the past to play the shitty games that suck ass and protect his younger version, leading into some of the best levels in the whole game. With the next one being based off that memorable scene from the movie where the Terminator arrives in LA and then picks up his clothes, boots, and motorcycle from that bikie diner. They even managed to get the licensing for that random ass country song from the film, making it feel even more faithful. And in fact, if you smack the jukebox here in the background, it also changes the song to George Thorogood's Bad to the Bone.
Continue acquired.
Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
Now at this point, it's like an old school beat 'em up, with the player able to not move only left and right, but also up and down as well. You got a couple of basic attack moves here too, and can also charge forward, knocking enemies back, which is pretty useful considering how easily you get outnumbered. Most of the time though, I was just distracted by all the fun little references. Like for starters, how every single enemy you fight here is based off a character in the film. Like the guy with the arm sleeve tattoos who whacks the Terminator over the back of the head. And even the way that this guy holds his pool cue as he attacks is identical to how this random side character did it in the movie. Even the lady dancing at the jukebox is straight from the film too, along with old mates sitting at the bar.
perfect.
And then the boss fight is against that bloke who owns the diner. Yeah, that dude who originally unwittingly donated his sunglasses.
That's it, goddammit.
In the most faithful way though, this entire level is spent with the T-800 walking around buck naked, though for obvious reasons they didn't include certain body parts. From here it jumps right ahead to the bit where John's being chased by the T-1000 in the LA River, which is another style of play where you have to move up and down, avoiding all the hazards and obstacles in the road and trying to hit these little speed boosts. And I know this is probably supposed to be a bit of a reference to the turbo tunnel in Battletoads, but all I could think of when playing this was dodging the boulders in the Mega Drive version of Aladdin. In another really cool little random detail too, if you look off into the background, you'll even see Big Jeff's diner, which is where Sarah worked in the first movie, and you can even see her crappy old motorbike still parked out the front. Either way though, this level felt like much needed vindication after the absolutely dreadful bike chase in that old DOS game. Also, the ending for this level is also really cool, with the T-800 again saving John in the nick of time, and that awesome bit of the T-1000 walking out of the fire being faithfully recreated. What follows is easily the most unique level in the game, where you've got to escape Pescadero Hospital as Sarah. Because this one is almost entirely stealth-based, where you gotta sneak around avoiding the nurses and security guards, and hiding in doorways to sneak up behind them and knock them out with a nightstick. Early on in the level, the T-1000 pops up as well, and the way this guy starts chasing after you at certain points is pants-shittingly tense. As in, you will shit your pants. I think it's a neat detail too how Sarah can only take on the female security guards and is easily overpowered by the male nurses, which kind of makes sense physically. This was also the point at which I first ran out of all my continues and had a proper game over, which then meant I had to go all the way back and replay through the entire thing from the start. Because as this thing is unabashedly old school, losing all of your continues means that's it, you lose. Though that does make me think that maybe the continues are a bit mislabeled. I mean, aren't lives and continues two separate things? Either way though, if you run out of all your continues, it's back to the beginning. So you not only need to be really mindful of not losing them, but also mindful of keeping an eye out for spare ones, with these usually being hidden away somewhere in almost every single stage.
Continue acquired.
I can see this thing maybe pissing people off a bit, and I was kind of surprised at first that they went with that route. But if it's any consolation, the second time I replayed through the story mode, I ended up beating the whole thing, so yeah, it's not that hard. At least that was on the normal difficulty. I mean, that hard mode is an entirely different kettle of fish. Anyway, it is worth it because it's after you escape the hospital where things start to get interesting, with the story branching off in different directions depending on your decisions. For instance, just like in the movie, you can choose to either reset the T-800's CPU or reprogram it to kill Dyson directly. Because if Dyson is killed, you're unable to gain access to the vault at the lab where the first T-800's armor is being kept, preventing you from ultimately stopping Judgment Day. And then killing him as Sarah has her arrested again, leading to an entirely new level where she shoots away out of a police station, which is kind of like playing through that shootout from the first film, but from an entirely different perspective. The thing is though, you can't do any of this for a first playthrough, and you're instead stuck with the canon storyline, with the T-800's chip being reset so he can be, you know, more human and not such a dork all the time. Followed by a massive time jump with the next level just being set right at the Cyberdyne building. Again playing as Sarah, where you're planting bombs to blow the place up, shooting all the SWAT officers armed with shotguns, assault rifles and riot shields. And am I going crazy, or does this bloke holding the riot shield not look exactly like Leon Kennedy? There's no boss fight during this level either, which makes sense I guess, but it does make this level feel a bit run-of-the-mill. And weirdly too, for some reason, despite this being the supposed cinematic storyline, it's completely missing that bit where the T-800 wipes out all the cop cars with the minigun, which for some reason only shows up in one of the other alternate timelines. Followed finally by the truck chase down the highway, which is similar to the bike chase up the river, and then the final showdown inside the smelting plant, where you're shitting bricks yet again as you're chased by the T-1000. But that's not it either, because there's still one final boss rush as we go back to the future to play as John, this time destroying Cyberdyne for good. Again. And then congratulations, you've just finished Terminator No Fate. Now you only need to replay it 2 more times to see the alternate storylines. Now, the biggest critique I would have about all of this is that overall it is quite short. I mean, all up for my second playthrough, which was still kind of sloppy, it only took me about 40 minutes to beat. Now, there are those other alternate timelines to play through, but there is only 2 of these, which are really only going to add another couple of hours at most. And speaking of, there's not really that many differences between either of them. I mean, they both end up with that same future level, one of which is just a repeat of one of the earlier ones with even the same bosses. I also understand that maybe this thing's been done for story reasons, but the lack of a 2-player mode really does feel like wasted potential. Plus, I also feel like there's other possible movie scenes they could have included, which would have added in some much more needed content. Like how it just glosses over that first meeting with the T-1000 and the T-800 at the Galleria.
The Galleria?
I mean, we do get to see it briefly in a cinematic, but it really feels like a missed opportunity for there not to be some kind of fight here. It could have been like a one-on-one encounter, for instance, like, oh, I don't know, a beat-em-up. Even that crappy old DOS game that still haunts my dreams had a level like that. The scene when they escaped the hospital had that really memorable chase sequence with a T-1000 after them on foot, which also probably could have been incorporated. Even if it was just a short one where you controlled Sarah, shooting back at it so it didn't catch up to the car. Or even playing as the T-800 and shooting it with the lever-action shotgun. In fact, there is a serious lack of the T-800 in general here, with the vast majority of levels either having you play as Sarah or John. I mean, you got that early one where you're beating up all the bikers in the bar, and then the second half of the bike chase, you get to play as him as well. But only during the alternate timelines do you even get to use him with any weapons, and even then, it's pretty limited. Where you're just pretty much going in one direction, firing the minigun at anything that moves. You can knock grenades back at enemies here with the melee move, which is kind of cool, but you also don't really need to, because just charging into everyone seems a lot more effective. Though I do like the touch there of how if you lose all your health, he does that whole rerouting power thing from the movie to come back to life. Outside of this, you have got that arcade mode, which is just that selection of levels you've already played, all of which you have to beat without dying. Then there's also the boss rush mode, which is just you replaying a selection of bosses from the main story as either Sarah or John. Again, bosses you've already beaten. I guess the main defense to all of this is that you can play through the game on those higher difficulty modes to unlock new content. Like for instance, if you beat the game on the hardest difficulty, it unlocks a cheat menu. Though I do want to say I'll never understand why developers put cheats or other really fun features behind a task which is the hardest thing to acquire, because by that point you probably lost all interest in still playing the game. Plus there are some pretty hard achievements to get here, like clearing some of the levels under specific circumstances, along with beating the whole thing on the highest difficulty with a perfect ranking for every stage. But it all just comes back to you just replaying the same stuff you've already done in that story mode. I guess that's kind of the problem when you're playing something that's largely based off a movie, where there's really only so many ways you can stretch out the content before it all runs out. Terminator Resistance was able to get around that by telling an entirely new story of its own, which meant that it could include as much stuff as it needed. No Fate, however, is obviously following the same plot of the movie, which means it's a lot more strict in what it can get away with. Does any of this make it a bad game? Well, no it doesn't, but I'm just trying to be transparent here and really make people understand where their money's going. In the game's defense though, like, that is kind of what it's going for, and it is supposed to be a sort of purposefully shorter old school experience. I mean, most games from back then you could beat in a little under an hour too, and the fun factor really came from replaying them over and over, getting slightly better with each attempt until you finally had that perfect run. And that's what No Fate feels like, you know, every time you get killed or you see that game over screen, you get hit with that feeling of just let me have one more run. So hopefully people are able to recognize that and appreciate it. Either way though, this really does feel like that Terminator 2 90s arcade experience that we never had. And whether or not you get this thing now or choose to wait until it drops on sale, you are still going to have a really good time here. I mean, I had a shit-eating grin on my face the entire time I was playing this, and it just nails that element of gaming that's the most important, which is making sure you're having fun. It's not going to win any Game of the Year awards, but as far as games go that let you punch bikies as a naked T800, it is up there with the absolute best.